Je crois qu'on peut y aller. Parce qu'il faut attendre des précisions parce qu'il paraît qu'on est filmé, mais il me semble qu'on peut y aller. Et puis Faïza Guène est arrivée, donc on peut y aller. Mais alors justement, Faïza Guène, je pense que vous la connaissez tous depuis Kif Kif Demain, qu'elle a écrit à 19 ans.
Probably know her. She wrote Kif Kif Demain, her first book. She was 19 years old. So she's here with a book called La Discrétion, with beautiful characters. I have a favorite character. I will tell you more about him later on. But Sindiwe Magona. I didn't know you, Sindiwe, before reading your beautiful book, which was extremely well translated, Mother to Mother. It was written in '98, and I'm wondering why the French people waited so long to translate this beautiful novel or work. So she's here for us. She lives in South Africa, where she writes, and I hope that we will go on translating your books. I was very impressed by your book. Indeed, I really was. Mohammed was impressed as well. We talked about the book. And Mohammed, you've written a lot. You keep writing. You write every day in a French newspaper, Le Figaro. I worked in another newspaper, but I do read Le Figaro nevertheless. So you've written books. It's the first time you write such a personal novel called Les Funambules. The book was unfortunately published in September 2020, but it was well received by French Academy, by Goncourt Academy, by the audience in general and readers. It was probably not the best period of time to publish a book, but anyway. Something surprising. There is an unexpected connection between your book, Sindiwe, and Faïza book. And this is James Baldwin's sentence, Fire Next Time, from Fire Next Time, James Baldwin. I have to wear my glasses. It's in La prochaine fois, le feu, fire next time. You need spiritual flexibility, not to hate the one who hates you. When his foot is crushing your neck, you have to be sure that you don't teach your children to hate him again. I mean, and so on. And this is exactly what your book is all about. A young woman, a generous young woman, is murdered because she doesn't understand the story of the country in which she is. She doesn't understand the violence of the country which is at the origin of the hatred that Baldwin is talking about. So you will have to read the beginning of your book. You explain what happened and the reason why the book exists. We have to read the first pages of your book. On you go.
This is the preface.
Ah oui, il faut un micro. Vous voulez que je le tienne?
Ça marche?
Oui.
Author's preface. Fulbright scholar Amy Elizabeth Bill was set upon and killed by a mob of black youth in Gugulethu, South Africa, in August 1993. The outpouring of grief, outrage, and support for the Bill family was unprecedented in the history of the country. Amy, a white American, had gone to South Africa to help black people prepare for the country's first truly democratic elections. Ironically, therefore, those who killed her were precisely the people for whom, by all subsequent accounts, she held a huge compassion, understanding the deprivations they had suffered. Usually, and rightly, in situations such as this, we hear a lot about the world of the victim, his or her family, friends, work, hobbies, hopes, and aspirations. The Bill case was no exception. And yet, are there no lessons to be had from knowing something of the other world? the reverse of such benevolent and nurturing entities as those that throw up the Amy Bills, the Andrew Goodmans, and other young people of that quality. What was the world of these young women's killers? The world of those young as she was young, whose environment failed to nurture them in the higher ideals of humanity, and who instead became lost creatures of malice and destruction. Go on or stop there?
We can stop.
I think so too. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much.
Je vous en prie.
So you decided, it's called Mother to Mother. So you decided that the main character of your story would be the mother of the young boy who was one of the murderers. And she's talking to the mother of the victim. They're both victims, actually. And the mother of this boy doesn't just talk to the other mother. She explains her boy, their life, what happens in the township. Could you tell us more about that?
Yes, thank you. I understood a little bit, sorry. You know, for me, the murder of Amy Bill was not only senseless, it was all murders are senseless and tragic, but it was made even more tragic by the fact that Amy was not even a white South African. And I'm not advocating the killing of white South Africans, don't get me wrong. But I'm saying the people who killed her thought they were killing the enemy, the white South African. She wasn't South African. She died only because she was white. Wrong color at the wrong place. And for me, the other side of the tragedy is this mother who has no idea that her child is the killer. And when the news broke, of course, like everybody else, I had great sympathy for the Bill family. And for months, for years, that was my story, the poor Bill family, the poor Bill family. Then in 8 months later, I went to South Africa for the elections. I was there for 6 weeks. Then I'm at the airport going back to New York where I work. And my friend who had taken me to the airport, we discussed the elections, the excitement, the hopes, the fears. And then we talk about the trial. These 4 young men were on trial. And Lindiwe says to me, oh, do you know, one of those 4 boys is Nontuthuzelo's son. Which Nontuthuzelos? And Lindiwe replies, Nontuthuzelos, the only one we know by that name. And my heart just dropped to my ankles. And I went, how is she coping? That was the first time I ever thought about the other side of such a tragedy, because we are all socialized to identify with the victim. But because this was a woman I had played with when we were children, somebody I had, you know, when we were growing up, identified as a friend, 2 things happened. First, I thought, oh my God, that could have so easily been my son. Nothing said when we were growing up, I would have the life I have, and I would have a son who was not a killer. Nothing said Nontuthuzelos would end up in that situation. So that was the first thing. And then the other one was, how is she coping? That was the first time I ever felt any empathy for the parent of a killer. But that was a huge lesson. I learned that parents like that do not have a picnic. They don't, because they know we don't care about them. And if we do even think about them, we condemn them. And for me, the tragedy of the Bill family was that South Africa came out and rightly so, I'm not saying it was wrong, arrested and sentenced, tried and sentenced these 4 young men. But in actual truth, Amy Bill was killed by all South Africa. We, the grown-ups, for allowing race hate to get to those proportions, where young people could say, one settler, one bullet, meaning you see a white person, you shoot them dead. They didn't coin those slogans. Those slogans were coined by grown-ups who had the language, who had the thoughts, but we plant hatred in the young. They are not born wicked. No child comes to the world hating because of race. We, the parenting generation, give that to the next generation and the next. And if South Africa doesn't wake up still, even today, to this idea that it is incumbent on all of us, the grown-ups of the nation, to remedy the situation, to teach new norms and new attitudes, and to erase the hate. Because nobody hates you or should hate you because of the color of your skin or your religion or your sexuality or anything. You know, really we need, as humanity, to grow into acceptance, total acceptance. There is only one race, the human race.
Mais vous dites en attendant.
But in the meantime, when something like that happens, you identify to the victim. But in the story, they are only our victims. Victims are everywhere. The one who dies is a victim. The mother is a victim. The boy is the victim as well. He's victim of the society you just talked about. And his mother, as you said, is a victim as well. She doesn't want to believe that it's her son. When she discovered her son killed, she see how others look at her. She's the mother of Satan, in a way. She's stigmatized, she's put aside, she's as if she had herself committed this awful thing.
Yes. If I understand that question correctly, everybody is a victim. Because of the situation in South Africa during apartheid, black people felt they were victims. And because of that hatred, white people, all white people, whether you identified with the apartheid regime or not, you were condemned because of the color of your skin. You know, the reverse of, apartheid was hatred of white people. And Amy dies because she's white-skinned. The mothers of the killers suffer because they are blamed for bringing up such kids who get to do such an awful thing. Killing a human being is one of the worst things one can do. But Amy's parents are victims. They allowed their child to go to South Africa to do this work, and she ends up being killed. All South Africans are tainted. But do we stop only at saying you are a victim, and not go into the underbelly of the beast and saying, how did we arrive at this stage and how do we right it? First, you have to admit things are wrong. If you don't have a proper diagnosis, you can never get to remedy. First, you must understand what is wrong. There was a march through Guguletu. There was a moment of silence by the president, but nobody thought to go deeper into understanding how we raise young people to become so careless about human life. And we perpetuate this, hate this one, hate that one, this one is wrong. And this is not working towards a humanity that embraces all, a humanity where there can be peace and order, a humanity where you can effect such transformation that you can actually call South Africa and all in it. Despite the constitution, all who live in it are South Africans. That's not how we live, even now. Malheureusement.
Mais justement,
in your book, you go to the origin of things. This woman has a very difficult life. Her son, he didn't talk for 2 years. He has a difficult life right from the beginning. And little by little.
Yes, the young men who were, the culprits who were apprehended, Of course they suffered. They were victims. They had this lousy education. They were always hungry. They never had enough of this. But that doesn't justify killing another human being. Much as I admit, and everybody who has any eyes, not even sense eyes, you can see what poverty is in South Africa to this day. South Africa is this country of huge, enormous contrast. Very, very, very rich, very, very, very poor. But you could be as poor can be. You can blame, industry and people who make money. Yes, you can, but that doesn't give you the right to kill. This is what, they were victims, but the tragedy points to something more. There are a lot of poor people. There are a lot of who would never kill. There are a lot of poor people who would never steal. And this is what the poorest person needs to aspire to. Raising kids who are upright in the kind of standards and morals and what we teach children, so that you can have a life, you can set goals, but you must also believe. Your belief system must be anchored in Ubuntu. I am human because you all are human. And no one is greater than the other. Much as I hated apartheid, and I didn't think because white people thought they were superior. Once I started believing they were not superior, that did not make them inferior either. I wasn't fighting to make white people others, just to effect a semblance of the realization of the oneness of humanity. It doesn't matter where you're born. It doesn't matter what language you use. This is not something you choose. This is not an achievement. You come to the world without your say-so. You're born by parents you didn't choose. And they raise you, mostly, the best they know how. And you take all the things they say as truth because you know no better, you are a child. But it is also your duty, once you attain a certain age, to wake up and to weigh things and to see what it is that you were taught that is right and what is, by the time you get to 18, 20, 21, you should have figured out. Nurturing is one thing. Children grow up and they think, when they're little, I saw babies around here, and when they're that age, they think the parents are gods. The parents know everything, but sooner or later the children wake up and they think, oh God, this is my parent, I'm so unfortunate. They don't like their parents because they learn to be separate, to become other human beings. This is okay. But as soon as you reach that age where you also can think for yourself, we ought to encourage people, young people, to think independently, make their own opinions, not just, drink what the parents say, because no parent is a god, and no one is infallible. We all make mistakes. We should realize this. And all the knowledge anybody has is not all the knowledge there is. And so there is constant revisioning of knowledge. And so what I think is the ultimate truth can never be the ultimate truth. And Mxolisi and the others were victims of being raised by parents and a generation that was steeped in race hate as a contrast to race hate. Race hate doesn't solve anything. You just perpetuate the hatred of the other people from your side. So you are fighting a war nobody can ever win. White people hate black people. That gives black people the right to hate white people. What does that solve? I don't want to live with hating white people because I know white people and I'm in touch with white people and I have white friends that go back decades, people I met in my 20s and these are very good people. I know black people I wouldn't want to meet in the middle of the night because they are bad people, not because they are black. You are not good or bad because of the color of your skin. It's because of what is in your heart and in your brain and the choices you make. And this is all we need to teach. All people are the same.
Mais c'est un discours qu'on n'entend plus tellement.
This is something we don't hear anymore, unfortunately. But it's not a murder that has been sort of programmed. It's the result of a chain of events. It's nice to, she's taking back friends to where they live, and she shouldn't do it. I mean, she takes them home, and she thinks that she should do it because she's leaving, and so on and so forth, even if she knows it's a bad idea. And those boys, they see a white girl, and at first, maybe they just want to shake the car or frighten her, maybe not kill her. And then it goes up and up and up, you know, and that's when you have the tragedy. But it's not a cold murder, cold blood murder.
It's not a murder that is not predicated. It's not planned. It's a spur of the moment. These children are rioting, you know, we hate Bantu education. We don't want Africans. We want a better education. You know, the usual thing for that time. And then they see this car driven by a white, somebody, oh, there's a white woman, you know, there's a white person driving a car. It's a woman. And, you know, the mob spirit. Nobody thinks they're going to start. They shake the car, they sing, and they think. But things grow out of hand. And then suddenly, I mean, the kids, Amy Bill and her friends, realize that they can't move the car. She can't drive anywhere. They are completely, it's too late. By the time they get out of the car and run, it's already too late. And even then, nobody's saying, I'm going to kill. But you take stones, you throw stones, and then somebody puts a knife through, and then she's dead. Not planned. If you talk to those 4 young people, I've spoken to all 4, but one, I spoke once and I realized, no, never again speak to this one. The other 3, these 3 young men work for what? The Amy Bill Foundation. Amy's mother used to travel to and fro the world with, you know, 1 or 2 of them. The Bills did something that I have examined my heart. And if I were in that situation, I applaud them. But I'm not sure I could be as forgiving. I'm not sure. I hope where I put to the test, I would be as they are. But I'm not sure I'm capable of such a huge... They adopted the kids who killed their child. When I say adopted, they embraced them. When those 4 young men appeared before the TRC, they didn't oppose that. And when they were released, Amy's father, he was still alive. I read in the New York Times, the only reaction he had, there was an article, then he said, my prayer, my hope, this is Amy's father, is that society can give these 4 young men the support they need so that they can live worthwhile lives. Because that's all people need. They need to be nurtured and directed and supported so that their eyes, their hearts, their minds open and they make goals. They go towards fulfilling their purpose in life. And everybody can do this. Most people can, let me put it that way, with proper direction and nurturing. The unfortunate thing is that to this day, South Africa hasn't woken up to this dream. The 4 young men, 3 of them were nurtured by the Amy Bill Foundation. They never reverted to crime. One of them, unfortunately, I haven't looked at that situation for 3-4 years now, went back to jail for different things. But South Africa hasn't woken up to the fact that all the children in the country need to be nurtured and minded and directed. If you don't mind the young, the very young, you have to catch up with them when they're in their teens, when they start reminding you that you have neglected them. You know, young people who are roaming the streets instead of being in school when they should be in school, sooner or later they end up in criminality. And that's what Amy's father was saying. I hope society will give these young men the support they need so that they live worthwhile lives. The Amy Bill Foundation worked with school programs, after-school programs, to support the children who have no support at home, with food, with activities, with homework, so that they can begin to move towards a life that has hope. There is nothing in life as dangerous as a life that not only has no hope today, but has no hope of ever having hope. Total hopelessness.
Mohammed Aïssaoui, vous avez été aussi impressionné que moi par ce livre?
Oui, oui.
Mohammed Aïssaoui, was this book as impressive for you as it was for me? Yes, because it's an impressive way of speaking of an intimate human tragedy and at the same time a social one, and the culture of a hatred being fostered. And I used to work on the South African constitution, and violence is an institution as well as hatred, because the organization of society between colored people, white people, and black people, the impact on individuals is perfectly shown in this book. And I think the book was published more than 20 years ago, 1998. And I'm sorry we haven't had the opportunity to read it in French before, because I think that much is said in this book. Faïza Guène, have you read it? No, I haven't. So you're lucky, because now you can read it. And Baldwin's sentence, if you choose it for your book, it is also because it is connected with your book. Yes, I think in a way it sums up my book. And I was stricken by this sentence because I could identify with these mothers compensating frustration, anger, over investing into their children's education. And I like the fact that he speaks about miraculous charity. Sorry for interrupting, but Baldwin's sentence wasn't written last year. It was written a long time ago, but nevertheless, it is still contemporary with what's happening around the world now. So, Faïza Guène, so our debate is about origins and fiction. So you were born in France, but your parents were born in Algiers. So part of your family is somewhere in your book. I can imagine beautiful characters. My favorite is one of the daughters, Anna, who is always a rebel. Mina, she's in exile in different way because she has to leave her country, and also because as a woman she couldn't have access to education, whereas her brothers could. And it's an interesting situation. I think it's the biggest wound of this character is that she couldn't go on studying. She had to stop studying. Actually, it's a definition of herself, and it's also a definition of her relationship with her children. And when she's more than 90, I think she still dreams on about studying, and it's one of the reasons for which she was her destiny was taken from her. My mum inspired me this character, and many mums I've met. One interesting point about this character is that you ask the following question, and I don't know the answer. When you don't want to be invaded by resentment, is it a way of resisting? As a matter of fact, the idea of taking an opposite perspective to tell the stories, the first thing was to see her as a woman and not as a mother. So I wanted to tell her story, her existence, who she was as a person, and not as representing a generation of immigrant. I didn't want to speak about a global story, but about a person's story. And it's a different angle, and then you start asking yourself questions that we are not used to asking about those women, their ambitions, although they couldn't succeed. Maybe her marriage wasn't with the man she wanted. When we start the book, we imagine that they're married. She's married to a man. They live in France. But then in the book, we understand that she didn't choose her husband. Yes, and unfortunately, it's a very common situation sometimes. And it's interesting to see her differently. And the issue of despise, and is it a way of resisting? Actually, it's a central issue in the novel, because the way she could resist makes me wonder where this seed of resistance is. You also have the history of Algeria and where that strength has gone. So if you don't get invaded by resentment, it's a way of resisting, because she's not a weak character. All these lives of exiled people hiding, this attitude, if we looked at it from a different perspective, it's also a way of showing her children that they are beyond a despise. The fact that she's out of resentment is a beautiful thing, but there's a nuance. Anna is not invaded by resentment, but she's full of anger. Because it's also the idea of transmission, because silence, dignity, and anger and injustice, because Anna is completely upset by injustice. That never disappears. In the first chapter of my novel, I speak about the silence, anger, and anger is transmitted. Although with her husband, she tries her best not to let her children being invaded by resentment, but nevertheless, she transmits it. And beyond despise, not resisting when she's shouted at by a civil servant, her children cannot stand that attitude towards their mother. Yes, because the children, in a way, receive the way their parents are looked at, and it makes them angry. So in the family, you've got many different destinies. So the older daughter, who's left, and one of her sisters leaves for a flat in Paris, although it costs her an arm and a leg. And the younger daughter, the rebel, and the brother, because you didn't want any symbol, but it's a paragon of what's happening now. The enslaved people today. Personally, for instance, I refuse to use Yuba, but it's not possible to treat people like that. These companies. I wanted to make a division between the four children show four different faces, attitudes, facing the family's history, because exile can be happy too. And as a matter of fact, for this family, the family is quite poor because the economic situation is quite central. So it's a parallel between the father who came to France in the 50s, and he was in the mining industry. No. Oh, yeah, and he was underage also, yes. So he's got children later in other conditions, but there is a parallel between the fact that the bodies are exploited. And through the son, I also speak about the social status of the family, and in this novel I've got to locate them, the name of the streets, the price of things, and it's important to understand their exile. So the common point is how to repair the offense that was committed against the parents. Yeah, the idea is to, at the end of the day, what I look for is soothing. And it's also the children's quest in order to go beyond anger and to get out of this history. They are burdened, children, burdened, because silence was hiding things, and for the four of them, they have to set themselves free of this history. Yes, to repair the offense committed against the parents. But is there any possible reparation? You have some answers in the children's destiny. For Anna, for instance, the point is to get some peace through words. She tells her family that she takes Zumba lessons, but she goes to the psychologist because she doesn't want to tell them that she goes to the psychologist because it's a bourgeois thing to go there. And she does not say that she tries and find a solution with her psychologist. I definitely agree with Faïza, and I know her book because she speaks about my mother, because she speaks about my mother and my sisters in her book. And the title, Discretion, it's a form of submission that you have to accept from the mother. You never raise your voice because you don't want to be noticed, and the danger is we want our children to be like that because we don't want them to be victims. And Anna refuses to do that, and hence the generation clash. And we understand both their lives. I definitely understand anger and the need to face things from Anna's point of view, and also understand her mother's point of view, who wants her to calm down. But it's fantastic to also in your book, Mother to Mother, once again we speak about mothers, to have a woman's point of view. It's not psychological, it's more intimate, and it's the intimate process of how interaction works with society, poverty, culture. This is really what I liked. It's not a tale about integration or not non-integration. It's a personal story through which we can understand things about society, present society. And it's also the political issue is interesting only in the intimate level, because I think it's the deepest way to touch any political point. If not, I would just give my point of view about a societal issue. So what we said, what happens between the civil servant and the mother. And in real life, when I go and speak with a civil servant, if somebody addresses my mother in a badly way, I don't have any possibility to access the person, whereas in the book, I've got the power to try and understand why the civil servant sees us this way, and what is at stake in that threesome is the element. It's terrible and it's funny at the same time. Once again, novels can say more than essays. Also something that I was interested in. Yamina feels that today it's impossible to say who you are. Saying who you are is too risky. If you take into account the present atmosphere, we don't feel any more comfortable at the idea of coming out. For instance, a Muslim family in France, now the situation is tricky because some people can be very hostile. Thinking of terrorism is understandable in a way, but we cannot be complete. And being complete, for me, is just allowing ourselves to be complex. So you practice Islam and you frighten people, or you are moderate and you're not frightening, but there's no nuance. So it's another form of discretion that is not our parents. But as soon as we come out, we are threatening. But we are no threat. The purpose of my life is not to be threatening. I mean, this family is quite a standard family. They want to live their lives in peace. So the question is, what about legitimacy? So the paradox, to grow up in a country where it is difficult to have roots, also because there is always the myth of going back to Algeria. And I grew up during the civil war in Algeria, so sometimes people thought that maybe we'll go back to Algeria after my studies. So how can I have roots in France in such a framework without speaking of colonial era, in particular with Algeria? And the third point is feeling at home when people keep telling you you are only guests, so you have to behave as guests in France. So how can you feel completely as a French citizen and meeting on a daily basis people who see us not as French citizens? And you cannot feel at home when you always have to say why you're here. And the issue of terrorism. But there is a situation that is very common in many families. As soon as there is a terrorist coup, in many families people say, oh no, not again. And families are asked to reassure people around them, saying that they have no part in the terrorist attack. But we have to say that to people. Because people are asked to, I mean, Muslim people are asked to say that it's not in their name. But it's funny because me as a white person, I don't have to say that it's not in my name, that some other white people commit terrorist attacks. A united people is not divided when they cry they're dead people. And this is a saying that is very interesting, I think. So, Mohammed Aïssaoui, you were born in Algeria, and you're in France. And I feel at home, because you left your country when I was 9 years old. And all you say, Faïza, is also something I've felt very deeply in my heart. And the first book I can remember, I was in college, and it was the L'étranger, Camus. And I thought that book would speak about me, but reading the book, I couldn't find myself. So it wasn't the right book, actually, I think. But nevertheless, it's a good book. So, but I was fascinated by, like, the mother, Yamina, in your book, is a stranger to herself, I think. And my reaction very early in my life was to say that I am in France, but I wasn't born in France. When I got here, I couldn't understand a single word of French. My mother is worse than Yamina, but she's 76 and she still wants to go to school. She can manage French for buying bread, but I cannot have a deep discussion with my mother because she cannot French. Yes, my mother is a bilingual, illiterate person because she cannot speak French, but her Arabic. Okay, I can speak the same dialect as hers, but I left my country when I was 9, so my Arabic is not that good. And she's never studied Arabic, so it's a bit difficult actually to have a deep conversation with my mother. Nevertheless, we communicate beyond language, of course, but it's impressive to see that I cannot speak my mother's language and she doesn't speak mine, that is French, 9, and I'm not expecting people to tell me who I am. It took me time to get there. But let's not expect other people to give you names, to define you. And nevertheless, we are given names, we are given labels. At the end of my book, I write, every human being is in exile, but Bretons in Paris are in exile because maybe they live in Paris, but their real home is Brittany. When they retire, they go back to their place, or they spend 6 months in Brittany. So it's a fantasy that people dream of going back to Algeria, but they generally stay in France. So the origin is connected with where you were born and the people you've lived with. And the people with whom I've lived, the strongest things are people in France, people I grew up with, my people. So this is France. France is my origin. It is where I grew up. And in my novel, I wanted to thank France, the country that welcomed me. I'm a bit upset by Algeria because I was expelled from Algeria. And I was upset because Algeria, for the military service, because I had academic diplomas, they wanted me to join the army. And I was given, for instance, when I got a prize for my book, there was nothing from Algeria about me, and I was a bit upset also about that. I wasn't acknowledged by the country where I was born. But nevertheless, don't allow people to label you an indiscretion. We are haunted by the land where we were born, but if we want things to go well, we have to try and manage a nice relationship with this land. So you say you're comfortable in France, but also you speak about poor people in France, people who have to be helped. And in your book, you have a sentence, you are born destroyed. Yes, and I speak about these poor people, but I can also see light in the associations, the NGOs that help the poor people who don't care whether they smell, whether they're dirty, but society is like that. My point wasn't to write about sociology, but I feel even more free in France because I'm allowed to say how poor people are supported by NGOs and maybe not supported by the state. So for me, there's no divide. I speak about poor people. And let's go back to language and to writing. The poor people have an emergency, is to have food, and they feel blessed when they have a roof over their heads. But also they wanted to tell their story, to leave a trace. And it was also an emergency for them. And they said, I also want to be part of the history of this country. Although I live in the street, I don't exist for many people. But for me, it's a book about wounds. Yes, but once again, I think that in both books, we speak about women who are hurt. My mother is a hurt woman who tries to live her life, to survive, and then to live her life. So it's about wound, and I like to deepen things. It's also about consumption, the fact that you can be happy in your life and being wounded, and very often you try and hide your wounds. And in the novel, and as well as in life, when you meet someone, when you see the wounds, then you see the person. That defines the person somehow. And when you speak about wounds, it's the first step towards fixing things. Fantastic characters. The philosopher, for instance. Yes, the philosopher. It's a character I made up. I wrote an essay about Rousseau, and that character is a big fan of Rousseau. And I wanted to speak of how we try and have a feeling of existence. And it's something that is very important for street people or poor people. And a sense of existence is a balance between living under the eyes of the others and at the same time being able to say who we are and trying to be who we are. The idea of the mother tongue is very interesting, is the fact that there is a myth that you don't master a language if you cannot have a deep conversation, a very intellectual discussion, because it's only what you say on a daily basis. I was born in France, but I was also born in Algeria in a way, because we didn't have any family here. So in my childhood, I could only see my parents. And my first year at school, my first school year, I wasn't able to ask my teacher to give me a hand with my clothes because I couldn't speak French to describe these things. I'm hungry, help me with my shoes, and I could only say it in Arabic. So I raised my foot, but my teacher thought I was just disrespectful. But it's only because I couldn't express that in French, and I was just terrified. So the point, Mohammed, but tell me how it is with you, but maybe things are clearer when you were not born in France. And I've got friends who were born in Algeria, and they say, I'm a foreigner, so I've got a more direct relationship with France. Do you feel as a foreigner? No, I don't feel as a foreigner, but I feel as a foreigner for Algeria. So it's a foster culture, and you make this culture yours that much. And for them, for those friends, they don't understand the issue of legitimacy. So I think that if I was a real foreigner, that wouldn't be such an issue for me. The feeling of belonging somewhere should be natural because you are born somewhere. But actually that feeling in me is not natural. It's a kind of paradox because you were born here, and you are labeled as Arab or Algerian. And I want to be crystal clear about that. I feel French, but I don't reject my original culture. Do you have the Algerian citizenship? Yes, but I used to have the Algerian citizenship, but I rejected it, and it was an affirmation act having the French citizenship. So when I go to Algeria, I go there as a Frenchman. But I think although it's just an administrative issue, but it is fundamental. So I had to tell my father about that, and I was frightened about telling my father that I didn't have the Algerian citizenship anymore. But I think that we expect too much definition from other people, and this is what the philosopher says. That's why I spoke about him, because I think he refers to very interesting things. And it's interesting because my vision is almost opposite to what you're saying. What you're saying is my dream. Because I would like people not to expect any assignation, any labeling, any acknowledgement from other people. And we should be forced to define ourselves, because who I am is not that I'm an Algerian. I'm a writer, for instance. I'm a woman. I'm a mother. This is who I am. Because these identity issues, each time we have a try, I'm referred to something I'm not interested in. And assignation is so complex, we would like not to rely on the outer perception, but it's a reality we have to take into account in order to get out of this small frame that is like a jail. I would like to have something else about me. I would like to have the space to show it, and we don't always have it. Sindiwe, we were speaking about language, and you don't speak in your native language. English is not your native language, is it? Do you write in your native language too?
Yes, I do write in Xhosa. Yeah, but it's difficult because one doesn't find publishers.
Ah oui, dans la langue, d'accord.
Because there isn't a big readership. Only if the book is going to be used in school. The publishers don't. You can't publish novels. They want a book that's less than 100 pages for the school. Yeah. So it's really the people who read Xhosa don't have the money to buy books.
Donc l'anglais.
And the Xhosa speakers who are educated and have money. Yeah. They choose to read English.
Donc l'affaire est entendue. Mohammed, il y a quelque chose.
Okay, I understand. And Mohammed, there is a love story also in your book. The narrator, who is a bit like me, wants to find his the possibility to express his love to the person he loved when he was younger. So the quest for this woman, because he heard that she works for an association, and very soon he understands that looking for her, that actually he's looking for himself. And this is what I wanted to show in my book. And you've never felt in exile? Yes, like everybody. When I speak about my book with readers, for instance, some people who used to work in the farming sector, they leave the farm and they have the same symptoms as if they had lived a land, and actually a land is not only a country, it's also a farming land, for instance, and they have that feeling of exile. And the more I speak about it, the more I see that it can be something that you leave, your childhood, for instance. Some people tell me that I used to live in a very poor social environment, and I felt that I am a traitor to my status. I don't think it's treason, because it means that you don't deserve it. But that's not true. Your life, maybe you were born in a family with a low social status, but there's absolutely no fraud. There's no point in thinking of an imposture syndrome. I think it's a fight. I work for a newspaper, Le Figaro, and I think I deserve working there, as well as all my colleagues. So, you, for instance, you work as a publisher. Yeah, but I mean, social despise give you a feeling of imposture. But yeah, you can reject that. You can reject that feeling. And Faïza, I think we say the same thing. But Mohammed's proposal is to ignore such attitude from other people because it's an obstacle. And the feeling of imposture you speak about is the feeling that you don't belong here. But if you feel you belong here, I mean, nobody has put you there. You're here because you have studied, because you have worked, you have worked hard. So you may have that feeling of imposture because you don't have naturally the codes for behaving. The first time, for instance, I saw that the bottle of Coke is on the table and there's no fight for having Coke, because at my place with my parents, I mean, they wouldn't have dared to put the bottle of Coke in the middle of the table because it would have been a fight, you know, to finish it. But Faïza, when you feel somehow gelled in the assignation, but the point is to find the right compromise between not feeling that there's an obstacle, class despise exists. It hurts. But I prefer to be aware of the fact that there's a mining field ahead of me and walking across it, instead of just people telling me, no, it's paradise, there won't be any obstacle, etc. So in my job now, and 17 years ago, I would never have dreamt of becoming a professional writer. So the system doesn't produce people like me. The system doesn't work well. There's no equality. It's just that it's an accident. It's a good accident. Yeah, but it's a lasting accident, so it's not an accident anymore. Yeah, you're right. It's a lasting accident, but it's a happy accident. Be careful. It's not the philosopher speaking, it's the writer speaking. Honestly, I don't feel that there is any imposture, even less now, because my first book was published when I was 19, and I can tell you that there are imposture, but the list is long. Yeah, you're right. But I think it's important also not to be in denial, because I see how things work around me. I know what I have to tell. I've got no complex with the situation, but I think it's important because as soon as I put words on it, as well as when we spoke about repairing offenses, there are new lines in my head. So my literature, what I write, what I create, this is my land. And no one can get into my land, no one can colonize my land. But Mohammed says that he's at home. But look, I'm home too because I'm comfortable in the armchair. I got an email and I said that I've been told that there's no, I mean, we should have stopped already 15 minutes ago, so sorry. So I took advantage of the situation. If you don't stop me, I'll go on forever. So now it's over. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Et alors, si vous ne les avez pas lus, c'est le moment d'y aller, hein, parce que tous les trois, c'est très très bien. Et puis, Faïza va lire Sindiwe, parce que c'est vraiment bien.